Greetings, shipmates of the spaceship Earth. This is a forward research report by Bradford Donald Keller Townsend entitled Wood, the Underappreciated Renewable Natural Resource. I'd like to begin by reading uh, the book Forest Journey, The Story of Wood and Civilization by John Perlin. The foreword is by the great Lester Brown. Okay. Before 1900 BC, Crete was merely another island in the Aegean until its rich forests attracted traders from the deforested area of Mesopotamia. The commerce in wood between Crete and the Near East injected such wealth into the economy that Crete was transformed swiftly into one of the region's most powerful states. Likewise, Macedonia, an insignificant backwater country on the fringes of the Greek world, became immediately rich and influential power of the Mediterranean after the Greeks had exhausted their own supplies of wood and had come to depend on Macedonia's forests for fuel building and materiel. The Macedonians soon translated their wealth into political and military power, resulting in the conquest of nearly the entire known world by their king, Alexander the Great. Millennia later, America's untouched forests laid the foundation for its allure as the land of opportunity. Pardon me for a moment. Ancient writers observed that forests always recede as civilizations develop and grow. The great Roman poet Ovid wrote, for instance, that during the Golden Age, before civilization began, even the pine tree stood on its own hills. But when the Iron Age succeeded it, the mountain oak, the pine were felled. This occurred for a simple reason. Trees have been the principal fuel and building material for almost every society over 5,000 years. From the Bronze Age until the middle of the 19th century, to this day, trees still fulfill these roles for the majority of people who inhabit our planet. Without vast supplies of wood felled from forests, the great civilizations of Sumer, Assyria, Egypt, China, Knossos, Mycenae, classical Greece and Rome, Western Europe, and North America would never have emerged. Wood, in fact, is the unsung hero of the technological revolution that has brought us from a stone and bone culture to our present age. Transportation would have been unthinkable without wood. Until the 19th century, every ship, from the Bronze Age coaster to the frigate, was built with timber. Alternate materials for shipbuilding, such as bladders and reeds, provided too fragile to bear the weight of much cargo. Every cart, chariot, and wagon was also made primarily of wood. Early steamboats and railroad locomotives in the United States used wood as their fuel. Wooden ships were tied up to piers and wharves made from wood. Carts, chariots, and wagons made of wood crossed wooden bridges, and railroad ties, of course, were wooden. Wood was also used for beams that propped up mine shafts and formed supports for every type of building. Water wheels and windmills, the major means of mechanical power before electricity was harnessed, were built of wood. The peasant could not farm without modern tool handles or wood plows. The soldier could not throw a spear or shoot his arrows without their wooden shafts, or hold his gun without the wooden stock. What would the archer have done lacking wood for his bow and the brewer and vintner without their barrels and casks, or the woolen industry without wood for their looms. Wood was the foundation upon which early societies were built. Those were non-contiguous paragraphs, so it took me a moment to flip the pages. I wanted to cover what I thought were the most important salient points. This is a positive video, the first one I've produced that will go into my solutions playlist, as most of them have been warnings against the lies of solar voltaic panels, human-caused climate change, and wind power, and electricity. Why electricity is very practical and power source, but is not practical to do many vital human activities such as growing our food and producing the minerals to make all the machines. In my previous video, I mentioned that the Earth's population has increased over 8-fold since the use of a practical Watts-powered, coal-powered steam engine. So there are innumerable cases where wood has impacted history, from the chariots of the Egyptians to the frigates of the British Royal Navy, the Dutch East India Company's 1,000-plus merchant vessels plying the world's oceans, taking sugar and spices to Europe, and textiles and manufactured goods around the world to trade. The Greek word for architect, if you break it down, is chief builder, and then that goes farther to leading woodworker. So from the very dawn of civilization, wood has been the primary building material, and everybody, I would think, it's common sense or common knowledge how wood is used in construction. For Americans, wood was the master resource. My ancestors were the first Europeans to come to this part of North America that we call the United States and Canada region, and survive and multiply and spread westward. And wood was how they made their stockades to protect themselves from the raids of their Indian enemies. And they had Indian allies, which is how they survived, by picking a faction and allying with them. That's the same way the Spanish were successful, by becoming a faction in a coalition. Were able to carve out a little stronghold and from there expand outward. The pioneers could build shelters, barns for their livestock, so that they could have milk throughout the winter, providing calories and nutrients. Their livestock could survive the colder weather in the higher latitudes, and of course shelter for themselves, and the fuel to stay warm in the winter. So this abundant forests of North America were everything. And there's a little statue near us that had a pioneer family with the man holding a musket in one hand and a axe in the other, with his wife and child, which she's wearing a bonnet, and the little boy. And they moved the statue and removed it, and there was a public outcry, and the little statue is put back in the town circle in the Fountain Square neighborhood where I live near. So that the axe and the forest Abraham Lincoln spent his youth felling trees, trying to expand his father's farm. Uh, Back then, you were like a slave to your father until you were 18, and he could, if you're like 14, send you out to work on someone else's farm or to lay ties on the railroad, and your wages would go to your father, and you wouldn't get any. And he would abandon his family for periods of time and leave him in charge to try to hunt and gather and scavenge. And they went through periods of hunger, skipping meals, and he had to take care of his little brother and sister. Um, it struck me powerfully when I took a course in African history, the huge change wrought by humanity upon the continent of Africa, even before the modern era of the last 400, 500 years. Uh, Millions, billion trees were cut down in Africa for fuel and to make room for agriculture. Uh, Large areas that were covered with forest, even by, let's say, 1000 BC, had already been felled. Mesopotamia, Iraq, where us Americans have a lot of experience, as we conquered Mesopotamia recently, because they have the best oil reserves in the world with the highest energy returned on energy investment ratio, I think as high as 80, where it takes very little investment to get high, because not all oil is the same. Some has much higher carbon content than others, where Iraq has the world's best oil, and some of the worst would be the tar sands of Canada, and then on the low end would be the Venezuelan swamp oil that takes a lot of refining and equipment to get. You maybe get under a 10-to-1 ratio out of Venezuela, and you may not even have a high enough return off of tar sands to even justify it without heavy subsidies into the system, as it may only be a 4-to-1, and you need 3-to-1 just to get it out of the ground, take it to a refinery, and then from there to get it to a filling station for a semi-tractor trailer truck, a dump truck, a car, a motorcycle. The epoch that we're entering now is one of adaptation and limits. Our schools are doing a good job of teaching the young people ecology and environmental values. So I think that trend is just, I have children, and having dropped them off at school or having to pick them up walking the hallways, I see banners and posters that professionally printed as well and produced, as well as the children talking about ecology or showing ecology and environment values. So we have limited resources and constraints, and thought leaders, and now that I'm one of the elders of society, we need to try to spread an ecological consciousness. And over my life, over a third of all the species of creatures on Earth have gone extinct, maybe even more than 40%. It's hard to know, because there's still a lot of species that were never cataloged. All the way back to Xenophon in Greece, and several senators in Rome gave speeches on agricultural regeneration. Xenophon ran a treatise on cover crops and retaining walls and other techniques of keeping the land fertile. Olives in Greece, trees. There are trees that are hundreds of years old. So you can have sustainable regenerative farming. The Latin people, when the Rome was a kingdom and a republic before the empire period, had many small farmers who were like the corporals and sergeants and lieutenants in the Roman legions, used regenerative farming successfully and were able to build their soil every year versus deplete their soil. To do this requires physical labor and planting with the hoe, where you make or stick and make a hole and plant seedlings and seeds or germinated seeds versus plowing the soil, where you disturb the root system and all the microorganisms, and keeping cover crops, rotating your livestock so that they naturally manure the soil, composting, and those type of things. But basically only using say you have 3 or 4 acres of land, only using a half an acre at a time, which is enough to grow your fruits and vegetables, and having a small orchard with several kinds of fruit-bearing trees and bushes, like a strawberry bush, or a row of strawberry bushes, and have a diversity of animals and plants, and rotating the animals around, and the gardens, so that you never use a soil for too long, and then let cover crops like cowpeas, and having your ducks and geese run around and eat in that area, and pee and put their guano in there, and then as it rains, that natural nitrogen affixing gets into the soil, and all the microorganisms get to thrive and do their complicated chemical processes, and you can actually gradually build the nutrients and the quality of your soil. Plantation style agriculture, or mechanized petrochemical agriculture, is a slow suicide, like an alcoholic addicted to vodka, where it may take you 10 years or much longer to eventually kill yourself and cut your lifespan by 20 years. That's what pretty much all civilizations in history have done to try to support large cities and concentrations of wealth of their oligarchies. They depleted their soil. So here we have a renewable resource. We can plant trees. It is not like petroleum and coal, and it was the primary resource, the resource that just had to be carefully guarded. And now for the descent, as it was for our ancestors, for our descendants, wood is going to be a precious life and death resource, as it is renewable, and will be used to warm homes, and be a building material, and to build all types of things like wagons for transportation of food into villages and towns. Thank you very much. Cheerio, and have a wonderful day.